Hi, everyone. It's Monday, May 26th. I'm Vineet Brach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom, and here are your top headlines today. Well, starting in Abbotsford, police say they're continuing to investigate the death of a teenager after a reported stabbing at a park. Police say officers were called to Larch Park at around 7:30 p.m. That's where they found the victim in critical condition. First responders say that despite life-saving efforts, the teenager died from his injuries.
It's rare for sure, especially when all three are teenagers that are involved in this. And the impacts are great. I have young kids myself, same ages of these individuals involved, and it hits home as a parent. Not only to the parents that are grieving and reeling from losing a loved one, losing a son, now the parents involved that are dealing with the people that have been arrested. The impacts are great.
Two youth suspects have been arrested, and police say the attack does appear to be targeted. The park does remain closed to the public as this investigation continues. It's also been a month since the Lapu Lapu Day festival tragedy that killed 11 people and injured dozens more. 7 people remain in hospital, with 1 in serious condition. A moment of silence was taken in the House of Commons to commemorate the lives lost today. Take a look.
I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence following the tragic event that occurred on April 26, 2025 at the Lapu Lapu Festival in Vancouver, British Columbia. I now invite honourable members to rise.
And over the weekend, a tribute and fundraiser was held in Surrey to honor the victims of the attack. According to organizers, 9 Surrey families were directly impacted. The event was organized by a group that celebrates Filipino culture, that's Filipino BC. Its chair was on the early edition today.
What we're really ultimately discovering now is this is a social disaster. It's not a natural disaster, and it goes beyond the scope of the immediate tragedy. And there's still a lot of work to do with those directly affected, but we haven't even begun to see the traumatic ripple effect of this event.
Filipino BC says it's committed to showing up for its community. And as you just saw, their parliament is resuming after nearly 6 months, and there is a special guest to mark the return to the House of Commons. King Charles and Queen Camilla have just touched down in Ottawa today. He is marking his first royal visit to Canada since his coronation. Prime Minister Mark Carney has asked the King to read the throne speech tomorrow to officially launch Parliament. This visit really aims to highlight Canada's sovereignty amid tensions with the U.S., so we will have more coverage on that coming up tomorrow. In northern BC, the BC Conservation Office Service is investigating reports of people illegally feeding grizzly bears. The CO service says the incidents were reported along Highway 37 near Meziadine Lake Provincial Park. Grizzly activity in the area has forced BC Parks to close parts of the campground and prohibit soft-sided tenting. Park staff have been working to deter the grizzlies by using what they call aversive conditioning methods. Now, penalties for feeding and attracting wildlife can be up to $100,000 and also include jail time. And that's what we have for you so far this afternoon. You're watching CBC News BC. BC Today is up next. Stay with us.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. King Charles and Queen Camilla have landed in Ottawa ahead of tomorrow's throne speech. So, have Trump's threats to make Canada the 51st state changed your opinion about the role of the monarchy? And in our second half, we'll take a closer look at cooperative housing in BC. What are the challenges facing them, and what can the province do to provide more support for expansion? I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thanks for joining us on radio and live stream. You can call us now on our top story. What are your thoughts on King Charles and the monarchy? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690 on your cell. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And today marks 1 month since the tragedy at the Lapu Lapu Day Festival in South Vancouver. 11 people were killed when a man drove an SUV into a festival crowd. 30-year-old Kai G. Adam Lowe has since been charged with 8 counts of second-degree murder. A number of communities have marked the anniversary over the weekend in tribute to the victims. The organizers have been liaising directly with the victims' families this past month. RJ Aquino, the chair of Filipino BC, spoke on the early edition this morning.
It was convene a number of agencies in the city, with the province, with the federal government, to just form this sort of crisis response. And since then, and it really is kind of amazing to think that it's only been a month, but the coordination with other organizations like the Red Cross, like United Way, St. John's Ambulance, among others, the Archdiocese, to not just coordinate a disaster response, but to ensure that we have all the mechanisms in place for proper fundraising, for a way for people to donate and ensure those funds go to the victims and their families. But what we're really ultimately discovering now is this is a social disaster. It's not a natural disaster, and it goes beyond the scope of the immediate tragedy. And there's still a lot of work to do with those directly affected, but we haven't even begun to see the traumatic ripple effect of this event.
And turning now to today's topic, King Charles and his wife, Queen Camilla, have begun their whirlwind 2-day visit to Canada. He will be headed to Parliament tomorrow to deliver the speech from the throne in the Senate chamber, launching Canada's 45th Parliament. This was the moment his plane touched down in the nation's capital. The sunny day in Ottawa made for a royal welcome, with the band playing as they headed down the plane. The couple arrived to greetings from Prime Minister Mark Carney, Governor General Mary Simon, representatives from First Nations and other dignitaries. The King has a brief but packed itinerary ahead of him that will culminate in tomorrow's throne speech. Prime Minister Mark Carney invited the King with an intent to underscore Canada's sovereignty against threats from the United States. This is the 3rd time a monarch delivered a throne speech in Canada. The last time was back in 1977, when Charles's mother and predecessor, Queen Elizabeth, read the speech. And Prime Minister Mark Carney invited the royals for the return of Parliament in hopes of underscoring Canada's sovereignty. So today, we are asking you, what are your thoughts on the monarchy in this moment? Has President Trump's 51st state rhetoric changed your opinion about the importance of the monarchy? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now to take your calls is Brad Miller. He is an assistant professor at UBC's Department of History, and he specializes in Canadian legal and constitutional history. Hello, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
So how significant is this from, like a historical perspective?
Well, I mean, this is the third time, as I understand it, that a sitting monarch has delivered the speech from the throne, and it comes, as you just pointed out, at a moment in which Canadians are probably more than they have in decades thinking about what it means to be Canadian. And at least tomorrow, the crown and the person of the king is going to be a part of that thinking. Whether it's significant for the institution of the monarchy, I think remains to be seen.
And if we sort of look at it within context of these repeated remarks about annexation from a sitting U.S. president, view it through that lens, how important is this?
Well, this is a way of marking out Canada's distinctiveness from the United States, right? We've heard a lot in the last few months that, or at least we've heard a lot from the president, that the border between our two countries is artificial, that it would be better that it didn't exist, that we are effectively one people. And I think, Canadians, most Canadians do not believe that to be true, right? Obviously we share a lot in common with the United States. We consume American culture constantly. But most Canadians, I think, also know that we are different from the US in lots of ways. And this kind of quirky institution, the fact that this modern inclusive democracy, like us, this modern inclusive democracy is also a constitutional monarchy, is one of the ways that we are distinctive from them. It points, I think, to the fact that we have evolved our institutions very gradually and very slowly over time, where we're not a people that is prone to revolution as the Americans were in the 18th century. And those sorts of distinctions, right, that in an ordinary year, in an ordinary era, might not mean very much, have become really significant to us in the last couple of months. And this speech, at least for people that are enthusiastic about it, this speech is going to be some small part of making that distinction meaningful.
And then on a global stage, how do we sort of draw, strength from the monarch to show the rest of the world who we are?
Well, I think in this regard, the monarch is going to be a very useful tool of Canadian nationalism right now.
Okay.
Here's what I mean. Ordinarily, most Canadians don't pay any attention to the throne speech, right? More Canadians, I assume this to be true, more Canadians probably watch the State of the Union. Many, many more Canadians probably watch the State of the Union than will pay attention to the throne speech whenever it's given. Right? We don't usually have a domestic market for this kind of pageantry, this beginning of the parliamentary session. Right now, we do, and we've got an international market, right? People are paying attention to this around the world. Newspapers and media outlets are reporting on it. This will be a way that the government's pro-Canadian agenda can reach, right? Media markets, people, politicians, like very, very far from our shores, right? So listen, it may not have a ton of substantive effect, but I think the Prime Minister is gambling that it's worth trying.
I want to bring in a call that we've had come in from Patricia in Nanaimo. Hi, Patricia. Thanks for joining BC Today.
Thank you very much, and I'm enjoying your program, even though you've only just begun.
You just wait. It gets even better. What are your thoughts?
Number one, I want to say welcome to His Royal Highness and his partner. Glad to have them in our country. And number two, my main thoughts are the fact that I see the royal family as family. And in our lives, we each go on within our family in our own lives and in our own direction. But when we need each other, that's who we turn to. And that's what I feel, that they're here because we need them here right now. We need to verify the fact that we are our own sole country, but we are part of a bigger family. And that's how I feel about that.
Well, I appreciate that, Patricia. Thanks so much for calling in. And of course, we welcome calls from anybody to let us know how you feel about King Charles's visit or how you feel about the monarchy in general. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Perhaps you've changed your mind on the role of the monarchy in Canada, thanks in part to recent world events and talk of a 51st state. But whatever your views, we would love to hear them. We're joined by Assistant Professor of History at UBC, Brad Miller. Brad, what are sort of, I guess, the limits of the monarch's power, when it comes to helping Canada on the global stage?
Well, tomorrow the king is going to read a speech that was written for him by the Liberal government. And that's about as close as the monarch can get to making political statements. Right? The monarchy is one of those institutions in our system and in the British system as well that certainly performs a public function, but we don't put the monarch in the position of making partisan stances.
Right.
We certainly don't put the monarch in the position of taking contested political positions. So the monarch's function tomorrow is going to be about gathering attention, right? The king is going to give a speech that gets reported on around the world, and hopefully many Canadians pay attention to it. But the monarch is not going to hit the campaign trail, right? The king is not going to take positions on trade policy. That the king is not going to take positions outside of the House of Commons on what the specifics of the Canadian-American relationship should be. And we've already seen the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, issue a formal invitation to Trump to attend state functions in the UK. And so while right now, tomorrow, we're going to see the king in his position as King of Canada, talking about Canadian defiance and building the Canadian nation, we will soon see the king meeting with Trump as part of his role as I should say, part of his day job as the King of England, schmoozing Trump, right?
Right.
In other words, the king is going to be the mouthpiece of the government's policy in this regard.
Okay. I did get an email that just came in from Joanne in Victoria. Joanne writes, as an Indigenous person and recent threats from Donald Trump of annexation, what stands out to me is the place and role our people have in Canada. It should not be so willfully ignored that Canada is unceded territories, which means that until modern day treaties, the majority of Canada was never ceded to the colonizers. Why doesn't anyone mention the role of Indigenous people? The monarchy to our people is more important than the relationship between the monarchy and immigrant Canadians. We also got another email in from Hugh, who writes, the British monarchy and their tabloid shenanigans serve to remind us that the idea that some divine being has put one person in charge of a nation's destiny is ridiculous. Whether that person is Charles Windsor, as the figurehead of a hereditary ruling class, or Donald Trump as the figurehead of plutocracy. I thank you all for emailing it. Keep them coming. We also have a phone call in from Mohammed. Hi, Mohammed. What are your thoughts on the monarchy visiting Canada?
Hi, thanks. I'm not a fan of the monarchy. I'm especially not a fan of King Charles. I think he's a bit of a twit and has been historically. And the Queen, my God, she shouldn't even have that title. It's disgusting that she actually has that title. The British have had a long history of colonialism, and it's time to change that model. The money that the monarchy has gained from colonialism is incredible wealth. And why are we paying for them to come visit us? And for him to speak in the Senate, it is that money should be going towards First Nations and Indigenous people, not to pay for their security. I'm sorry, it's disgusting.
No, that is a fair point, and I thank you for making that, Mohammed. And Brad, we sort of look at Prime Minister Carney taking a bit of a gamble that enough people will be on the side of the king, but there are a lot of Canadians that don't agree with having this figurehead of the monarchy. Is there a risk that he will end up alienating some people by bringing King Charles in?
Yeah, it's entirely possible. The polls on the monarchy in Canada in recent years show that Canadians are all over the map. There's a small contingent of people that are really enthusiastic about the crown and really enthusiastic about Canada being a monarchy. There's a percentage of people who I think are typified by Mohammed's points. They, see the monarchy in historic terms as imperialist and colonialist and exploitative, elitist. I think the more common view, the plurality view in Canada is mostly apathetic. Right? So I think the presence of the crown here, the presence of the monarch here, specifically the presence of the monarch in a state occasion like the opening of Parliament, is going to really anger some people. Right. It really will. I think the audience, though, people talk about this having an audience of one. That might well be true, right? That one of the intents of this is to appeal to Trump, but I think it's also a moment where the middle of the country, right, that big apathetic middle who doesn't usually think about the monarchy,
right?
They're unlikely to be outraged by this. They're probably unlikely to be super intrigued by it, but Mohammed's views, I think, represent a sizable portion of Canadians, but not one that might be, especially powerful in political terms right now.
All right. Well, taking another phone call. Actually, no, this is an email from Robin, and she writes, I love the monarchy, but I'm not so sure how they are planning to deal with Trump's ridiculous aspirations to make us the 51st state. And Randy and Burnaby writes, kings, queens, princes, and princesses are for fairy tales and B-list movies. No governor general, no throne speech, no pomp, no spectacle. And the ties that bind. It's so over. We will take in a few calls now, though, from Angela in Vancouver. Hi, Angela. What are your thoughts on King Charles, visiting?
I think you guys have just described all of my thoughts.
Oh, good.
In a really simple statement, the idea of sovereignty and monarchy being in the same sentence, to me, sounds like an oxymoron.
Okay.
That said, I grew up in Canada. I grew up with a very romanticized version of the royal family. My mom and my grandmother were from England. I heard all the stories of Queen Elizabeth when she was a little girl and through the war, and there, all these really great, wonderful things. But of course, like a previous caller mentioned, I'm very, very aware of the colonial history.
Yes.
And then from a pop culture standpoint, I watched Diana's wedding. I looked at everything that happened to her. I'm definitely pro Diana, not pro Camilla. I watched William and Kate and their wedding and loved all of that. I watched Meghan and Harry's wedding. I don't understand why he can't work out stuff with his own son, or maybe that's just, the popular stuff, right? Or pop culture stuff. But yeah, I'm kind of like all over the map. What I hope is that the impact will be that it's making a strong statement that Canada has friends. Britain is saying this, monarchy is saying we are pro-Canada, we are behind them, we are absolutely making a strong statement that this is a sovereign nation, and globally, others should come forward and do the same thing. And so I hope that's what's coming out of it.
I really appreciate you making that point, Angela. Thanks so much. And Brad, I think that does sum up what so many of us that grew up in Canada, thanks to perhaps grandmothers or mothers, we were taught this tale and that it was a fairy tale, and they kind of were part of our general collective, but we didn't put a lot of thought into what the monarchy actually meant and actions behind them. So as you're an adult, you're kind of reconciling the two ideas, and they don't always line up. But as Angela said, on the global stage, in this moment, with everything happening with Trump, it really does seem like Prime Minister Carney was wanting to somehow make a statement to show that we are more than just a sidekick to the U.S.
I mean, the people often say right now that Trump likes the crown, Trump loves the king, and that does seem to dovetail with some of what we know about him. Certainly if you look at the way that he decorated the Oval Office, it looks like the
He
kind
likes
of tacky
gold and
part of
power.
Buckingham Palace.
Yeah.
Right. But here's what we know for certain. We know that Trump likes famous people. And the king is one of the most famous people in the world, and he's from one of the most famous families and one of the most famous institutions in the world. Right. So I think, we can see why the prime minister decided to roll the dice on this and decided to try to dress up the throne speech in a way that it hasn't been for decades.
A couple more calls have come in. This one is from Basil in Port Coquitlam. Hi, Basil.
Hi, thanks for what this program and this topic. Because of the King Charles is so concerned about the environment, unlike his mother, I think may have and hopefully will have a great influence on Trump in that respect, because we all know Trump thinks it's all a hoax and he doesn't believe what the scientists are saying about the most important crisis in our world today, which is the climate problems. And hopefully then Prince Charles will have that strong influence on him and all the leaders of many nations in our world as to if we don't do anything about our climate, we've got major problems overseeing everything else regarding how we feel about our pocket money, how we feel about housing, how we feel about any other area, education and any other area. We've got to do something about that. And he is very much an environmentalist, so hopefully we'll have some influence, and especially on Trump, and especially on Prime Minister Carney, who's kind of sort of fading away from what he should be doing about the climate.
Well, I thank you for making those points, Basil. Always lovely to hear you call into the show. And Brad, that sort of dovetails with what you were saying, that King Charles would be somebody that is attractive to Trump because he has that power and he has that fame. So is there a chance that perhaps he could have some influence over Trump in other ways, that he could help him to understand, climate action or some of the issues that Trump perhaps doesn't like to deal with?
I think to answer that question, I need to understand the way that Trump's brain works. And I'm not sure that anyone does, and I definitely don't.
That may be an entirely different show.
It's entirely possible that that the king decides to speak to Trump at some point about the causes that the king cares about. Now, as the caller notes, the king has a track record on environmental issues. And it's, I guess, entirely possible that that makes some small impact on Trump.
Okay.
I'm not sure I bet on it, but with this president, more than with anything's possible.
Okay. A couple of emails have come in. Lisa writes, I have never supported the monarchy. What good do they do for Canada? It seems like they have just been a huge expense to Canada over the years. What does our government, us taxpayers, give them yearly? What does security for them cost on their trips? That could go a long way to our food banks. And Lorraine writes in, I like King Charles, and I really like the optics of this. I like the fact that he's come to Canada as a king to support us in these troubled times. And we will have time for a couple of phone calls and emails right after the news. Brad, if you don't mind sticking around with us for a few more minutes, we certainly have a lot of people interested in expressing their thoughts on King Charles's visit to Canada for the next couple of days to deliver the speech from the throne. Right now, though, it is 12:30, and that means it is time for the CBC Local News with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A teenage boy is dead and 2 young people are in custody after a stabbing last night in Abbotsford. Police believe the victim was targeted when he was attacked in Larch Park at around 7:30. There's no word on a possible motive. West Shore RCMP say an 80-year-old cyclist has died after a head-on collision with a van on the Trans-Canada Highway this weekend. A 51-year-old driver and 15-year-old passenger were inside the van and were both taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. There's no word on a cause, but drugs and alcohol have been ruled out. And more critics are speaking out against the provincial government's Bill 15. The government says it would allow important projects like hospitals and infrastructure to be fast-tracked. Some First Nations say it's an overreach and could allow the government to sidestep regulatory oversight and proper Indigenous consultation. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Periods of rain this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 10. Highs reaching 21 with a few showers and some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 20. Highs in the low 20s with showers and some sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 22. And showers this afternoon in the Fraser Valley. Some sunshine in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria with highs around 18. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Rob. Are you excited for King Charles to be in Canada?
Oh, so excited.
I know you're
fantastic.
a big fan of the monarchy.
Yes.
Thanks, Rob. This is BC Today on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and of course on the CBC News app. We've been talking about people's thoughts on the monarchy, whether they've changed at all in recent times thanks to some of Trump's threats of annexation. But King Charles and Queen Camilla touched down earlier today for a 2-day visit to Canada. They will be delivering the throne speech. And our guest has been Brad Miller, an assistant professor in UBC's Department of History. We have a couple more calls to come in from Brian in Kamloops. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. What are your thoughts on King Charles?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in a country that was oppressed by British rule for 800 years, and they have oppressed people all over the world. I don't think they should be forgiven that easily. And to reiterate what other people have been saying, our tax money goes to their security. That money could help a lot more things. And yes, he does say good things for the environment, but I believe we can do that on our own. I believe Canada should be a republic. We do not need a monarchy to control what we do or to help us in any way.
And I can tell that you are Irish, obviously. You know, so you might have stronger feelings on the monarchy than perhaps the average Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. You know, we were taught about it in school where I'm from, and I'm a Canadian citizen right now. So yeah, I do love Canada. Canada's a great country, but yes, the one thing I don't like about it is it's ruled by a monarchy. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you so much for calling in, Brian. And Jordy in West Kelowna, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, no, I just feel that Canada should be standing on its own, that we need to grow up. I mean, I think the very fact that you take on, you know, a role of an independent nation shows that you are standing up for your sovereignty. And, you know, in terms of Charles and Camilla, like, I hate to say it, but I mean, their backgrounds, like their personal backgrounds and so on, don't inspire sort of a real loyalty for me as far as Canadian citizen. And to me, I mean, you know, you were talking about the threat of Donald Trump, and my biggest concern in this country is not Donald Trump. It's the fact that we were ready to throw out a Liberal government just before this election, and then Trump entered, and then all of a sudden everybody's got their focus off of what was happening to our country and is focusing on this sideshow. And it is a significant sideshow. But to me, like, I would rather have an enemy at our southern borders than somebody like who's, I mean, basically Carney has had, like, he was Trudeau's advisor on a number of things. He was also like bringing in a number of Trudeau's people. So we still have a very similar government to what we were ready to throw out. And that, to me, is the biggest sovereignty issue right now, is is just protecting our country from further decay. I mean, our country was becoming a banana republic, and so yeah, better to have an enemy at our southern borders than sort of one within. And,
all right.
As I say, the monarchy, as far as I'm concerned, we need to grow up as a country and stand on our own.
Okay, Jordy, thank you so much for that. And we'll get one last email in before I let you go, Brad. But John from Vancouver writes, I love all this to-do about Charles opening Parliament. We're a strong, independent, sovereign nation, and here is the king of a foreign land who for some ridiculous reason is still our head of state to prove it. I think people have been very split on this today, Brad. You do have those sort of royal loyalists that are, excited. They embrace this and they feel like it's, standing together and showing solidarity, while others think it's just a ridiculous spectacle and a waste of money.
Yeah.
Do you think this visit at all will have continued change for those that perhaps are feeling, a bit more open to the monarchy again, or is this just going to be a blip?
Well, I mean, I think odds are it's a blip.
Yeah.
Odds are, as of Thursday morning, we go back to business as usual, such as that is right now.
Fair.
But there's a chance the ball bounces either way, right? Mm-hmm. When the monarchy becomes high profile, sometimes that turns people off. Right? Listen to some of the opinions we've heard today.
Yeah.
I guess there's also a possibility that that association with pro-Canadianism, right, at this particular nationalistic moment, does something to increase the profile of the Crown in Canada and the appetite of Canadians for the Crown. Certainly, I know a lot of monarchists that would love that, but it's a risk.
I suppose we'll have to wait and see how it plays out then.
I think so.
Brad, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right, that was Brad Miller, assistant professor in the UBC Department of History. And after 6 months away, Parliament has resumed today, and first order of business was to elect a new House Speaker. That person will be Liberal MP Frank Scarpaleggia, who represents the Quebec riding of Lac-Saint-Louis. Scarpaleggia was chosen by a secret ranked ballot by other MPs. He will preside over business of the House of Commons, act as the impartial arbiter of House proceedings, and maintain order during debates.
And thank you for the member of Hull Aylmer, who took the reins of the speakership at a difficult moment. At the end of a mandate, when things tend to get a little feistier, I would remind members that we are at the beginning of a mandate in the selfish hope that you will afford me a little grace period. Once again, thank you for your confidence. I have few words because, well, we all have things we want to accomplish, and we've been away. Thank you, colleagues.
And thank you for joining us once again on BC Today. I'm Amy Bell, sitting in for a couple of days for Michelle Elliott. Now, a cooperative housing complex in Vancouver has been speaking out about a deadline approaching to pay $1 million tax to renew its lease. Helen's Court in Kitsilano says it's not fair that the renewal will be subject to the provincial property transfer tax, and residents cannot afford it.
It's affordable, it's stable, we're a village. And I think that's rare. So we all know each other. And it's self-governing. So we support each other. We take care of each other.
Figure out that administrative fix. It's a mistake and that it's putting co-op housing in jeopardy. How hard can it be to prioritize this?
So what can we do to support more cooperative housing in BC? And what are the biggest challenges facing co-op housing? Call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Thom Armstrong, Cooperative Housing Federation of BC Chief Executive Officer. Hello, Thom. Thanks for coming in.
My My pleasure, Amy. Good to be here.
So we heard from a resident of Helen's Court that Finance Minister Brenda Bailey said in a phone call on Friday that they will not be exempt from the tax, but she will be meeting with them soon for further discussions. So I suppose, what can co-ops facing lease renewals do? This is obviously a huge concern for so many of them.
It is, Amy, but it hasn't been a surprise to most of us. The tax has been in place for almost 40 years. Right. So I guess the reason that a co-op looking to renew its lease might appear to be surprised by the tax is that they haven't had to think about it for 40 years because they've been secure in their lease. But up comes a lease renewal, and now it's on everybody's mind. But I think it's worth remembering that this is not just a co-op issue. This applies to all non-market, non-profit, Indigenous-led housing in BC.
Okay.
So in our conversation with the minister, there's clearly an interest in addressing the issue in a way that produces a fair and equitable result. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to have to be something that we talk about for some time. Mm-hmm. And then get to a solution that works for the government and works for the community housing sector.
Now, I think if we can kind of move back a little bit, for some people, I think they've always heard about co-op housing, but perhaps don't fully understand how it works. For those in that situation, maybe just a quick explainer of what we're talking about when we say co-op housing.
Yeah, we sometimes think of co-ops as the best kept secret in the housing ecosystem.
Well, we're going to blow it out of the water now.
That's a good thing. Shine the light on it. So a co-op it's really simple. It's just a legally incorporated association incorporated to provide housing to its members. Okay. So when you're a member of a housing co-op, you don't own the home you live in, but you own the association that owns all of the homes.
Okay.
So in a sense, you're both landlord and tenant at the same time.
Okay, that makes sense. I believe we've actually got a resident of Helen's Court on the line now, Carla Pellegrini. Hi, Carla. Oh, no, yeah, sorry, we'll just have to wait for that. So I'll get back to you, Brad. What are some of the biggest, benefits that people find from these co-ops?
I'm glad you asked me that, because if you ask someone who moved into a co-op yesterday why they moved in and what they think the big benefit is, they would probably say affordability, because co-ops are deeply and permanently affordable.
Okay.
But if you ask someone who's lived there for 10 years why they stay, they'll almost always say because of the community.
Okay.
And that's what co-ops are famous for. Security of tenure, permanent affordability, and community that goes far beyond the bricks and mortar of a building.
Then why don't we have more of them? I mean, it sounds like a perfect solution, and we obviously know we are in a deep housing crisis here.
Well, I could be accused of being biased, but I think it's the perfect solution too. And to be honest, we're still recovering from those years when the federal government, literally back in the early 90s, decided that it no longer had a role to play in non-market housing and downloaded it to the provinces. In some provinces, that was further downloaded to municipalities.
Right.
And that created a housing crisis that we're still trying to dig our way out of today.
With so many layers of red tape to try and get out of.
Exactly.
What could the government, whether that's municipal, provincial, federally, what support could they do to, improve the situation that we have, but also expand co-op housing?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that the solution involves all three levels of government. It has to. So we can start with municipalities who can provide land, and zoning relief. A provincial government that's investing. This government's making a record investment in community-based housing, and finally a federal government. And we think that now there could be an enormous opportunity for the federal government to come to the table to provide additional low-cost financing and investments and grants that make co-ops affordable, and other forms of community-based housing as well.
Oh, okay. We actually do have Carla Pellegrini from Helen's Court in Vancouver on the line. Hi, Carla. Thanks for coming in with us.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for looping me in. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Carla. How you doing?
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
So what is the latest that you have heard, Carla?
We heard from the finance minister that the decision had been made that the nonprofit affordable housing co-ops on leased land would not be exempt from the property transfer tax.
Okay. And what do you, is there any indication of what the next steps will be for Helen's Court?
The minister has offered to have a phone conversation with us to discuss the matter. But in the meantime, we have a month to sign our new lease with the city, and we need to still decide if we're going to sign a lease that's less than 30 years to avoid the tax, or the 40 plus 20-year lease. That is our desired option to prolong the existence of the co-op, but that would incur the property transfer tax.
Okay. And I believe you wanted to make a point that the Premier and the Finance Minister had initially been surprised to learn that the property transfer tax applied to nonprofit co-ops, and had actually offered to fix that more than a year ago.
That's right. Okay. And that's why we've been pounding the drums on this issue recently, because it has been a year since they learned of this issue. They were surprised. They told us it was an unintended consequence of the legislation, and they promised to fix it. And now, we're the first of many co-ops to face this issue, and our time is running out. So, for us, paying the property transfer tax on top of a very large capital repair loan is not affordable, and we're not going to be the first co-op to face this issue. So the fact that they've acknowledged it was a mistake, they were surprised it was an unintended consequence, and still yet a year later and several years later, I know Thom and his team have been working on this for a long time. We're just running out of hope that anything will ever change.
Carla, I really appreciate you calling in with us, and we'll keep in touch to see how the situation continues. But thank you so much. And Thom, she made such a good point that they are the first of many that will be ending up in this position. Have you had any explanation as to why, if they were surprised that this was an unintended consequence, that they said they would fix it, more than a year later, they still have not removed that tax?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that it was an unintended consequence. I think the outcome that we're looking at now is exactly what was intended. I think the big problem with the tax is almost in its name. When you hear property transfer tax, you think of a fee simple transfer.
Exactly.
Somebody's transferring something they own
to another
to
person,
someone else to own it. But a long-term lease is an interest in property that has value. And long time ago, the government decided that value would be taxed in a transaction of 30 years or more.
Okay.
And I mean, the call for an exemption is compelling, but it really risks triggering another whole set of unintended consequences. So that's why we think the government is being prudent in sitting down with us and talking about what a solution might look like across the entire community housing sector. And in the meantime, we have suggested to the co-op that they have some short-term options that could provide some relief.
Okay, so more of a Band-Aid solution for now,
yes,
with hope that there will be more widespread reform.
That's right.
Okay, we do have another call that's come in from Bernadette in Sydney. Hi, Bernadette. Thanks for calling BC Today. Hi, Bernadette. Are you there? Oh, looks like we may have lost Bernadette.
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now, Bernadette. Thank you. Sorry for that. So, do you have any experience?
Well, I was looking at possibly buying into a co-op, but one of the things that's very difficult, and not just in co-ops, is the fact that pets aren't allowed. And I think, with all this loneliness and everything that's going on, it would be lovely if people could have a pet. Also, in the particular co-op I looked at, there were a lot of restrictions, like you couldn't have families stay there, and there were a number of restrictions. But the pet thing is really difficult, I find, because as seniors, and this loneliness factor, it would be lovely if pets were allowed. And I don't know if anything can be done about that, and if co-ops are each different in their regulations and their terms and conditions. Can somebody speak to that, Amy? Thank you.
Thank you for calling in, Bernadette, with those points. And Thom, obviously, no one solution is ideal for every person. Are there, certain aspects of co-op living that make it difficult for others?
There are, but I'm going to say it. I'm entirely with Bernadette on this one.
Okay.
There are some co-ops built some time ago who put restrictions on pets. But all of the new co-op development today is being done through our community land trust. And I can tell you that every community land trust co-op, every new co-op in BC is completely pet friendly. I think of it as a mental health issue. I'm entirely committed to pet-free housing.
Okay.
Or not, sorry,
no.
not pet-free housing.
Not pet-free. We want
Smoke-free housing.
all the pets.
Pet-friendly housing.
Okay.
Right?
No, I agree. And I did want to ask you more about the community land trust? How does that factor in?
Well, the community land trust, I think, is the biggest single innovation in housing, the community housing landscape in the last 4 decades. And it's a bit of an irony today because we have a new federal housing minister, and our community land trust partnership with the city of Vancouver goes right back to the days when Gregor Robertson was the mayor of Vancouver. It's, co-ops have a reputation for being small, diverse, supportive communities.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a place to live, that's a perfect option. If you're looking at a real estate asset that has to be leveraged over time to develop, to redevelop, to add homes, to refurbish homes, it's not necessarily the best way to organize a real estate asset base. So the Community Land Trust aggregates the assets of co-ops, incorporates development capacity, long-term asset management expertise, and is really the solution now for a growing, thriving co-op housing movement.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a couple of emails that have come in. Mary from Vancouver has a question. Can you please explain why renewal of a lease attracts a property transfer tax? How is the ownership of the property being transferred? And I think that's what many people are stumbling over.
Yeah, it goes back to that word property.
Yeah.
It's the unfortunate title of the tax. What's being transferred is the interest in the property. And an interest can be freehold or leasehold. But whether it's freehold or leasehold, it has a value, and that value is taxed.
Okay, hope that helps you a little bit, Mary. Lorraine writes, thank you, CBC and Amy, for doing a segment on housing co-ops. The public needs to be educated on this alternative and affordable lifestyle, and all levels of government need to be working towards creating more housing co-ops and affordable housing. And we hear this time and time again here from our audience, is that we need to be looking outside the box. We need to be generating newer ways to get affordable housing. How quickly would you like to see, or is it feasible that co-ops could be expanding right across BC? Because I believe most of them are in Vancouver and Vancouver Island.
Yeah, the vast majority are in the Lower Mainland.
Okay.
There's 34 on Vancouver Island. Right now, they're all between Sauk and Sydney, but we are just about to break ground on a very brand new housing co-op in North Cowichan.
Okay.
We're very excited about that. But I think the partnership that exists now between all 3 levels of government, the promise that's been made by Prime Minister Carney and new Minister Robertson to dramatically scale up the production of housing in this country on a scale that we haven't seen since the Second World War. I think there's enormous potential, not only for new co-ops, but for the redevelopment of existing co-ops to add many, many more co-op homes to the portfolio.
Okay. Van from Victoria writes, I've lived in my co-op for over 20 years. This was the best move I've ever made after retiring from the workforce. The government must renew their obligation to Canadians and stop the greed and stop the homelessness. This is just common sense now more than ever. And Hugh writes in, co-ops are like stratas. They are the worst place to live if someone wants to disrespect others or push them around. But they are the best place to live if everyone understands the need to communicate and get along. A radical political message from the 1800s that is more relevant than ever. And I did want to ask you as well, not just from an economic point of view, but we are starting to see a lot more people wanting that community, that they're wanting to be around others and they're needing that support. So talk to me about how that social aspect of co-ops can help people as well.
I think it's really important. If the pandemic taught us anything, it's how easily our social connections can be ruptured. And that has produced, I think, a mental health crisis in the country, not just here in BC. And for the longest time, housing options were really built around the individual and, individual ownership, strata ownership, purpose-built rental housing.
Yeah.
All of those forms of tenure can provide someone with a place to live, they don't necessarily encourage people to create the social connections that are so important to our ongoing mental health. And that's what co-ops do, because when you move into a co-op, you're not just somebody's neighbor, you're their business partner too. You've bought in with a par value membership share, and now you're responsible not just for your own home, but for the success of the entire community. And that builds support networks and engagement that really replaces a lot of what some people might say was lost when in times when people were more naturally drawn together.
Right, and needing to support each other. That whole takes a village, it really does ring true. We've got time for one more call from Annika in Vancouver. Hi, Annika.
Hi.
So what are your thoughts on co-ops?
Well, I rent a house and I share it with people, so I guess, it's a little collective house, but in a way it's a total little co-op. I've always wanted to live in a co-op, but it's hard to get into. But one of the things I'm wondering is, like I was thinking about, and I don't remember what it's called, but the huge development next to Queen Elizabeth Park that was sold to developers, and all of the back and forth and the promises that weren't being kept, and why something like that wasn't automatically, if it really was about providing supportive housing, done as co-op. And, my feeling is that it feels like very often politicians are more interested in making real estate developers happy than in actually providing housing for people, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense, and I thank you for that, Annika. And we are nearly out of time, Tom, but I just want to give you a chance to briefly respond to that point.
Well, that is such a great example. We all know that the caller was making reference to Little Mountain.
Yes.
And Little Mountain was a classic failure of leadership and an example of what not to do in the face of a housing crisis. If you want to solve the housing crisis, government needs to take community assets and use them to build community wealth. And that means partnering with the co-op housing sector and the community land trust movement.
I expect we will be hearing more and more from you and others involved in the Helen's Court issues, but certainly wonderful to have you on with us today, just to give that broader sense of what the co-ops are and really what they can do for so many people in the community. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
All right, take care, Tom. That was the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC's Chief Executive Officer, Thom Armstrong. And that is our show for today.